I had planned to do an episode on the African Union. Perhaps I'll save that for another time. But with South African Finance Minister Tito Mboweni releasing his budget speech for 2020, it seemed like an appropriate time to take a look at that. Now, there's quite a bit wrapped up in that budget speech. It's actually eloquent in some ways, referencing Pliny the Elder and many others. But this is a discussion to talk about expropriation without compensation and the endless generosity towards state-owned parastatals, state-owned enterprises. So with that in mind, I wanted to spend a few minutes here debunking the myth of the ANC demand and need for expropriation without compensation, and tell you just how seriously the ANC does or does not take the concept of land restitution. And once again, that is borne out in its budget. So here, let's take a short look at the budget. So my numbers are off slightly because it was reported two different fashions. One said 1.84 trillion rand is the budget, and the other said 1.95. So my numbers are based off 1.84 trillion, slightly smaller. So if we look at South African budget proposed by the finance minister, we see here $1.84 trillion or rand, or the equivalent of 122 billion US dollars, is South African budget. Of that, the finance minister promised 60 billion would be set aside for Eskom, the state-owned public utility which provides electricity across the country in a monopoly, and SAA, South African Airways, the state-owned legacy crown jewel, if you want to call it whatever, the state-owned airline. So SAA and Eskom to get 60 billion rand. The current exchange rate about 15 rand to the dollar. That would be 4 billion US dollars to bail out, once again, Eskom and SAA. And this isn't even going to get them out of the hole that they're in. But in this budget, we see $4 billion for them. So how much money did the minister set aside and the ANC government set aside for land restitution in their budget for 2020? Well, the minister says directly in his statement that 500 million rand will be set aside for land. All right, that's good. But when we look at a 1.84 trillion rand budget, 500 million rand is the equivalent of 0.00027% of the entire budget. Now that's insane. That is $33.33 million. That's not going to be enough to even buy a well-staffed, well-developed resort somewhere in Kruger National Park, let alone buy farmland for aspiring farmers. 33.33 million. To me, that says that the ANC is simply not serious about this issue. They continually tell the public that we must have expropriation without compensation because we can't afford to buy land. Well, that's strange. $7.1 billion to purchase arms at a time that South Africa didn't need it 2 decades ago. The state oil trust sold off, and who knows where that money has gone. And here we have endless bailouts. South African Airways has gotten over $2 billion US dollars over the last decade or plus. And now they're going to give them yet more. I'm not sure how that breaks out for Eskom, for SAA, but $4 billion more to bail them out. But there's no money to buy land from the willing buyer, willing seller. So let's take a look at this. Why is it that the finance minister wants to give $4 billion to these two enterprises, which are state-owned? They're not private equity. So let's take a look at the numbers. Eskom employs 46,665 workers. SAA employs just 5,752 workers. However, SAA is part of a group which includes Mango, the low-cost airline, and some other entities, 4 entities in total. And if you add it all up, that's 10,071. So for 57,000 employees, we'll round up, of these two state-owned entities, the government plans to give them an additional $4 billion US dollars, 60 billion rand, in this budget. Now, the numbers go up and down over time, but there are approximately 650,000 farm workers across South Africa. 650,000. There are 35,000 commercial white farmers and about 5,000 black, for lack of a better term. That includes coloreds, Indians. But for those who are non-white in South Africa, that's how they're breaking it out these days. 35 and 5, 40,000 commercial farms, which is down significantly from over 60,000 in 1994. And part of that's consolidation, and there's other reasons for it. But 40,000 commercial farms, 650,000 farm workers. But the land budget in here is only 500 million rand, or $33.33 million. We are talking here over 700,000 people employed in agriculture already. And they're going to devote $33.33 million to land restitution, an issue that the ANC says is so important, so critical for the vitality of the nation and for ending the poverty and ridding us of the disparities, the historical legacy of apartheid, that we must take property, not just land, but property, without compensating the owner. The problem with that is that there's money. So why is the money going elsewhere? The ANC desires to add 1 million people to the agriculture sector. They want to add 1 million workers. Now, how is that going to be possible when the ANC devotes the bulk of its resources for something like this to bailing out state-owned enterprises, which through their own efforts, either corruption, ineptitude, poor decisions, because they're not facing a balance sheet, they don't have to be profitable. They do not answer to the customers, they answer to the party and to the state. And that, of course, is a key distinction with state-owned enterprises and governments owning what should be private equity, private entities. So here we are. We have Finance Minister Tito Mboweni telling us that he needs to give Eskom and SAA $4 billion this year. And for an issue that the African National Congress has said is so critically important to the social fabric and the economic well-being of South Africans, namely the issue of land, rural farmland in particular, just $33.33 million, or 500 million rand. So I ask you, is the ANC truly serious about this issue? I don't think so, and I've said so for years. I encourage you to take a look at my LinkedIn article. You can find it under my profile on LinkedIn, and you will find a discussion there about land and poverty in South Africa, and I talk about this issue very specifically. I will go into greater depth on other videos about this budget speech. So there's some good in there. A discussion about the National Sovereign Wealth Fund has been proposed and some other issues that come up. But for now, that's the issue, and this is Debunking EWC, the truth behind the ANC's commitment to land restitution and land reform in South Africa.